Welcome to NodeCast Explains. In early 2025, the world's longest undefended border, well, it became a battleground. But this wasn't a war fought with soldiers, it was fought with spreadsheets. Not with tanks, but with tariffs. This is the critical story of how an 80-year economic partnership, the bedrock of our shared prosperity, was pushed to the absolute brink, and how Canada found itself right in the crosshairs of a full-blown trade war.
So here's how we're going to break down this crisis. First, we'll look at the incredible scale of what was at stake. Then, we'll unpack the justifications, the official reasons used to launch this trade shock. After that, we'll get into the rapid-fire escalation, the devastating fallout, and finally, how this conflict completely and fundamentally reimagined the relationship between our two nations.
Okay, so to really understand the earthquake, you first have to understand the ground it happened on. Before 2025, the US-Canada economic relationship wasn't just big, it was, quite literally, the foundation of North American prosperity. We're talking about the world's largest economic partnership.
Let's start with this absolutely staggering number, nearly $1 trillion. That was the value of goods and services flowing between our countries in 2023 alone. It's a number so massive it's almost hard to wrap your head around, and it represents millions upon millions of jobs and livelihoods on both sides of the 49th parallel.
And look, this wasn't just about volume. It was about how deeply integrated we were. Canada was America's single biggest customer. Get this, we were buying more from the US than the UK, France, China, and Japan combined. Our energy grids were linked, our auto industries were basically one giant cross-border assembly line. And that trade deficit you hear about, it was a tiny fraction of the US total. This was a balanced, deeply symbiotic relationship.
So that's the billion-dollar question, isn't it? How did a partnership this tight, this mutually beneficial, get targeted for what really amounts to demolition? Well, the answer lies in a strategy that was laid out months and months in advance.
You can just see how quickly the talk became reality. It went from a campaign promise in October to a direct threat in November to an official government assessment in January, and then boom, February 1st, the hammer fell. A national emergency was declared, specifically targeting us, Canada.
Now, the official justification wasn't about economics at all. No, he was framed as a matter of national security. The White House cited an extraordinary threat from drugs and illegal migration, and it accused Canada of failing to secure our side of the border.
But here's the thing. How does that claim actually hold up against the facts? Well, the US government's own data showed that less than 1%, let that sink in, less than 1% of all fentanyl seized by customs officials was found at the Canadian border.
And then he said it out loud. Just weeks before the tariffs were imposed, this stunningly direct statement was made. When asked about his intentions toward Canada, President Trump said he would use economic force. Suddenly, this wasn't just a trade dispute anymore. It was being framed as an existential economic attack.
So once that first shot was fired, how did it all explode? Well, the conflict escalated with just breathtaking speed, pulling both of our economies into this downward spiral of retaliation.
I mean, this table just lays it all out. It's like watching a heavyweight fight. February 1st, the US throws a punch with sweeping 25% tariffs. Canada immediately punches back, matching it. 10 days later, the US targets steel and aluminum. A month later, Canada matches. The US then doubles down, hiking those tariffs to an incredible 50%. Then came the auto sector. It was just a relentless punch-for-punch escalation.
As all this was happening, you can bet Wall Street was watching in absolute horror. Now, to understand their reaction, you just need to know this one financial term, a correction. It's basically a warning siren. It's when a major market index falls by at least 10% from a recent peak, and it signals serious investor anxiety.
And what's truly mind-boggling here is the speed of the panic. It didn't take months for the financial markets to react. It took just 16 days for the S&P 500 to plunge into a correction. That's how seriously investors took the threat of a trade war between two of the world's most integrated economies. It was a flash fire.
The numbers on a stock ticker are one thing, of course, but what about the real-world impact? Well, the economic and diplomatic fallout was immediate. It was severe, and it was felt by everyone from factory workers to families to world leaders.
Right here, you can see that market correction in action. The chart shows the peak in mid-February, then this sharp drop in March. By early April, as the tariff battle was just raging, the market was down nearly 19%, teetering on the edge of a full-blown bear market. You can just see the value evaporating. So let's put a dollar figure on that. By the middle of March,
An estimated $4.5 trillion in value had been wiped from the U.S. stock market alone. Trillion, with a T. A staggering loss of wealth, all driven by what one magazine called whimsical and arbitrary policymaking.
And it wasn't just investors who felt that chill. A poll in early February showed that 60% of Americans knew exactly what these tariffs would mean for them: higher prices on everyday goods. The connection between the trade war and their own wallets was crystal clear.
And look, this was not a surprise to the experts. The Nobel-winning economist Joseph Stiglitz captured the consensus view perfectly. He said the impact would be bad, inflation would rise, and retaliation was, quote, inconceivable that it wouldn't happen. And you know what? Every single one of those predictions came true.
The economic damage was profound, for sure, but the deepest wounds were diplomatic. This trade war forced Canada to confront a brand new reality and to fundamentally reimagine our place in the world and our relationship with our oldest ally. Right in the middle of this crisis, Canada elected a new Prime Minister, Mark Carney, and our country's pivot began almost immediately. By May, Canada was shipping more of our oil to China than the U.S. by sea. By June, for the first time in decades, we were importing more cars from Mexico than America. This wasn't just talk, it was happening in real time.
You can track the absolute breakdown of trust just by listening to the language. In late January, our government was still holding out cautious optimism. Just 2 months later, the new Prime Minister's assessment was blunt and frankly devastating. The United States was, quote, no longer a reliable partner.
And then came the speech that officially marked the end of an era. Prime Minister Carney stood up and declared that the 80-year consensus of ever-deepening integration was over. It was a clear, unambiguous signal to Canadians and to the entire world that the old rules no longer applied.
And the key takeaway here is that the damage wasn't just temporary. This trade war created a new normal. The USMCA, the very trade deal that was supposed to secure our partnership, was strained to the breaking point. Canada was aggressively forging new partnerships, and the predictability that had defined North American trade for generations, well, it was simply gone.
Which leaves all of us with this one unavoidable question. When a relationship that was built over a century can be shattered in just a few short months, is it even possible to ever fully put the pieces back together? Has the very foundation of trust that our shared prosperity was built on been broken for good?